Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. Today we're diving into programming for athletics, hypertrophy, and so much more. Two incredible gentlemen have joined me today that I've been watching from afar for a long time, admiring their work. And today we get to dive into their brilliance. Stephane Cazeault and Pauric join me today from Kilo, from South Florida. And we're going to talk everything to do with programming, their business, and ultimately how you can leverage programming to be the best version of yourself in 2026 and beyond. Gents, it's an absolute pleasure to sit and first break bread with you and now share some elements.
Yeah, thank you for having us, first of all, on your podcast. It's much appreciated.
So first, Stephane, I've known about you for a very long time, since our mutual friend, Charles, first told me about you. Gosh, it was probably 2013 or something like that, where I've heard a lot about your programming from not only Charles and then Gavin and Derek Woodsky, and a lot of guys was just like, Stephane's the programming guy, he's the programming guy. And as I mentioned to you at lunch, like I hate programming, because what I recognize is, for me, the more I learn about programming, like I have some, mental block. Like if I know to do better, then I have to do better. And like sometimes with programming, I'm like, it just takes me so long to write, all the details that I truly want to write in a program. And I know somewhere through the grapevine, a lot of those details have come from you, whether it be from your social media, or from Charles's courses, or from Gavin. Everyone's referring to you and your stuff. So I wanted to say that, one, I'm very grateful for you and your lessons through the years, that even though you didn't know you were teaching me, you were. And I'm super excited to dig into your mind. And so maybe we just roll back to like, where were you before you worked with Charles? So you were one of the head coaches, if not the head coach with Pauric and group for a while, teaching his certifications?
Yeah. So me, kind of like I went to University of Montreal in exercise science. And during that time, I was working in a commercial gym in Montreal, like one of those high-end places. Like I like to say it's a cross between like the amenities of Lifetime Fitness and the luxury of Equinox.
Yeah.
So it was a good platform to get to learn on how to deal with clients, attract clients, and on and on. Yeah. Then I started continuing education with Charles Poliquin, Ian King, Charlie Francis, Eric Serrano, all these guys back then, because there was not a lot of continuing education.
Right.
And then I graduated in 2000, fast forward to 2005, I was asked to go work in St. Louis, Missouri, which was a high-performance center, which was really cool, because at the time it was one of the first, at least in the Midwest, where it was owned by a chiropractor. So we had chiropractors, we had nurses, so we had IV, a bunch of treatments, and then we had strength coaches. And I came there as a senior coach. Then, it grew a little bit. Then I became the head coach, became the St. Louis Blues strength coach. So then I moved up to the head coach in St. Louis. So we had like a Gen Pop, but we also had like NHL players, NFL players, Major League Baseball players. And growing up in Canada, like I dreamt of being an NFL player and training NFL players. So that was my goal the whole time. That's why I was so excited to move to the US to have that opportunity. And then what was really cool is in 2010, 2011, 2012, I was hired as a high-performance consultant with the St. Louis Cardinals. So I went to Jupiter, Florida. We did the whole spring training. Yeah, well, that's the one who owned the business.
Oh, wow. He comes here, or he used to come here.
Yeah, so he owned the facility called Central Institute for Human Performance. Yeah. So he was the owner. And it was really cool because the athletes would come, they'd get so let's say an athlete had a tight hip flexors, for example. He would go in, they would do a few ART pass on the hip flexors, they would come down, we'd do the training, they would go back up, they would do IV, they would do more treatments, they would do acupunctures, whatever it was. So it was kind of like this,
it's an ecosystem.
Yeah, where everything was under one roof. And it was really cool, and it evolved. And then it evolved to the St. Louis Blues. And then I was writing the programs for the farm teams and like the main team. And then the card strength coach was running the programs. But on top of it, I had about 11 guys from the cards that were private clients of mine. So they would come and train even in season in the facility. So that kind of grew and it evolved. It was kind of cool. And then in 2012, Charles approached me. We were at Andre Benoit's wedding in Calgary. and we're waiting in line for dessert. And then Charles was like, "Hey, do you want to come and work in Rhode Island with me?" So Charles was always like he was the person that was
the guy
that I wanted to be, So I'm like, yes, I'll take the job. I'll go and learn from you. So in 2012, I moved to Rhode Island, started working with Charles, with Pauric and Group and on. And then 2016, left the company and started Kilo. And we started in Huntington Beach, California. We really wanted to just have a group training facility for Gen Pop with all the systems that I'd built over the years. But while we were building our clientele in Cali, people were asking, "Hey, why don't you do like continuing education?" So I'm like, why not in the meanwhile? And that kind of grew. It grew to the point where in 2020, we're like, well, most of our revenue comes from the education, but we're spending most of the time in the gym.
Right.
So in 2021, when our lease ended in California, we decided to move to South Florida. So we're in Fort Lauderdale area, and we shift the model more to education. So we have the facility, but it's mostly to cater to our education, so our courses. So we have students from all over the world coming in. We teach the theory, and then we go in the gym and we apply the theory in the weight room. And so that's like, it's been growing and it's been doing really well. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Very cool. Pauric, how about you?
Yeah, not as extensive of backstory as Steph. I played a lot of sport growing up and really noticed the performance difference that came from using the gym correctly. And like, I got really lucky and trained under a few good strength coaches.
What sports did you play?
Gaelic football mostly, which is very Irish-based sport. So I don't know how much the audience would know about it, but I played a little bit of rugby as well.
So tell me about Gaelic football. Is that actually like soccer? Is it like rugby? Or is it
it's right in the middle of the two. That's the best way to describe it. So a lot more physical than soccer, a lot more aerobically demanding than rugby.
Got it.
Very dynamic, very repeat sprintability dominant with a robustness of
you look like you're built for that.
Higher contact effort. Like currently I'm probably about 10 kilos heavier than I would be to play it, but yes.
But your structure is suitable for that.
Yeah, so that's what I grew up playing. That was the goal. It's an amateur sport, so it's not a great goal to choose for your life pursuit.
But if you're Irish, that's
what you want.
Yeah, it hits home.
But so I got seen the real improvement you can make from proper performance-based training. And I was like, all right, that's the route I want to go down. So in 2012, 2013, I did the UK SCA, which is United Kingdom Strength and Conditioning Association. Didn't really resonate with me. Very Olympic lifting heavy, very like just authoritative. And then I was like, all right, let's keep looking. Find the Pauric group. Luckily, Steph taught me my very first course there. So I did level 1 and 2 with him. Then I came back the next year and got to meet Gavin, who you work with, the next year. So I'm from a very small town in Ireland. So it was really, really important to me to keep going.
How small are we talking?
1,000 people.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so very small. So it was really important for me to branch out and put myself in situations around the best coaches that I could be in, because I was never going to meet that in my day-to-day life. So I did that, kept going back and forth between America and Ireland between 2014 and 2019 till finally Kilo reached out and offered me a job. And between that and getting the visa through, I've been here now for 4 years.
What is it about Kilo that makes it unique or special?
We provide answers, not just statements, is the way I always like to think about it. Is, all right, here is something that you can go and apply tomorrow morning and you'll get better results for your clients. It's not, here's a soundbite that sounds great and you're really jazzed to hear someone say this because it confirms exactly what you want someone to say. No, this is what is going to actually help your clients progress, and it's going to progress for a long time because we're very, very long-term oriented. Like we have resources that span like periodization for 12 years for clients. So it's not just, all right, here's what you're going to do for the next 6 weeks. It's here's how you can train someone for the rest of their life.
How much, Stephane, do you, well, maybe walk me through your process. So like I got a lot of nuanced questions, you know, I like to get in the dirt, in the dirt a little bit, in the weeds, but someone starts with you today, you start with one of the NHL hockey players or even a Gen Pop person, like what's going through your mind and what process are you putting them through?
So to me, like I'll just rewind a little bit in time so you understand a little bit better the framework. But like earlier on in my career, when I was studying to be a strength coach and I did continuing education, like what was missing, I found, was like, you'd get a lot of information, but then I would leave classes and courses and I'd be like, okay, but I still don't really know how to truly write a program,
Right.
but I specifically don't really know how to progress programs over time to affect results on a bigger picture time frame. And, you know, so like we're talking about like 2000, right? And so much of the influence back then was very like bodybuilding oriented. And there was not a lot in terms of strength and conditioning. And Charles was like one of the first, at least in North America, to really put that to like, you know, more accessible to people.
Sure.
But the problem is it was mostly like short-term, off-season, like 12-week type of thought process.
Yep.
But I'm like, okay, well, I was fascinated by Olympic sports. I'm like, what's interesting about Olympic sports to me is they start with an athlete, and then they have 4 years. They have 4 years to peak for that one event. And during that 4-year period, you see drastic continual progress. Obviously, it's undulatory, right? Sometimes it progresses, sometimes you have to go back down, then it progresses higher. But it's that long-term perspective, and that's what I felt was missing in the industry as a student doing education. So my thought process shifted more to, okay, what are they doing in the Olympic world in terms of strength and conditioning that makes it that they can progress long term? So I start looking at periodization model and systems, but the problem is I quickly realized that training Gen Pop or even professional athletes in team sports, some of the Olympic-style periodization concept did not really apply.
Doesn't work, yeah.
Because the seasons are longer, and then Gen Pop, there's no season.
Right.
So then I'm like, okay, how can we deconstruct this and make something more logical that can still progress in time? So then, anyways, we can talk about that later, but it started with this. Okay, how can I really look at training on a long-term perspective, and what are the steps that I can take short-term to build towards that long term? So once you know long term where you can go, then it's easier for me when I assess a new client where they are in that continuum. So what becomes their starting point? So then you can kind of like let go of the fluff, the stuff they don't really need for where they are in time. And then you can like progress them to reach their peak over time, but knowing and understanding that physiology takes time to change, and making sure that they understand that it's not all about the short-term quick fix. So, I mean, the assessment process can be like multifaceted. Like it's a little hard to.
Let's walk through it. So, what as much as we can, I'd love to spend some time on it because I think it's useful for people to know what you're assessing and what they can progress. Like, if we're like, hey, is it just about more weight on the bar, or is it quality of movement? Is it specific things you're trying to do? Like, what are the variables you're looking at that you're actually, oh, that's a deficiency that needs to be over there, and this is an opportunity that needs to be better. Like, I'm curious what you're thinking about. You watch. I'm sure, like me, you watch somebody walk, you're like, oh, they're shitty at this, and they could probably do this really well. And like, you just see it. Like, I'm like, oh, you're probably good at Gaelic football. You're like, you see your structure as an athlete. So, like, what are you assessing when somebody walks into your facility? And knowing their goals obviously is important, but I'd love to just understand the dynamic in your mind of the assessment process.
Well, so like you first need to establish what are the key movements that you're going to use in your practice as a coach to affect change. So once you know like the core battery of exercises that you're going to use, you need to know if the trainee actually has the ability, the mobility and the skill to do these lifts. Yeah. So we like to assess movement at first. And then so let's say we look at the squat. So we're going to start with our ideal, which would be, let's say, a back squat, feet flat on the ground with a barbell on your back. And then you look at, okay, like with a controlled tempo so I can see what's going on. With like not too light, like you want like at least 60, 70% of your 1RM. Yep. There's enough flow that you can actually see what's going on. Yep. And then you look at the technique. And then like if it's horrible, then you determine, okay, well, technique is really bad. It could be the ankle, it could be the hip, it could be lack of shoulder external rotation. I don't really know at this point in time. So what we do is then we regress the step.
Yep.
Okay, let's try this squat variation. It's still bad. Let's regress it. Still bad. Let's regress it. So we kind of have like a series of variation. And then we keep regressing to the point where like, okay, now I like that squat pattern. It's safe for you. You can actually go through a full range of motion, at least at the knee joint. It's not too much stress on your lower back, whatever it might be. So we know, for example, that ankle dorsiflexion is a big thing. But we also realized over time that sometimes lack of ankle mobility is overstated. Sometimes it's not really the ankle the issue, it's more the hips. So now if we realize that it's the hips, then we need a even steeper wedge to kind of like clear room at the hip joint so they can actually squat lower and then really stress the quad at the knee joint. So then we have our starting point. Okay, so let's say your starting point, in order to have a healthy or proper squat pattern, is a 30-degree wedge with that's front-loaded. So it could be a goblet squat with a 30-degree wedge, where now the ankle mobility is a non-issue, the hip is a non-issue, the torso stays upright, so it's no stress on the lower back, but at least we're getting the pattern. And then we keep going with the assessment with all the other patterns. So like we'll assess the lunge, we'll assess the seated good morning, which gives you a good indication of spine control, posterior chain range of motion, and on and on. And then once we have all of that information, then we determine through exercise selection what are the steps needed to improve these weaknesses. But it's very, like initially, it's very mobility oriented. Mm-hmm. So it's about affecting change with that range of motion. So we have like a system where we basically put the athlete through multiple movement motor patterns. We have specialty techniques that we use to, like, for example, increase time under tension in order to lay down more collagen tissue, to strengthen the connective tissue at key joints and stuff like that. And then they're improving mobility, they're improving range of motion. And then eventually, once they hit a certain standard, then we're like, okay, now we can move on to more like hypertrophy dominant work at first to build a base, because we know that in order to reach a high peak of strength, you first need to leverage this with a high level of hypertrophy at first. So then we build the hypertrophy. Then once we build a certain level, we can move on to strength. So it's very, we really like, especially with Gen Pop, like block periodization, in the sense that it's very sequential. We try to not do too much all at once. There's a place and time for this, depending on the goal. But when we're looking at long term, especially with Gen Pop, we like to go phase by phase, one goal at a time, fix that goal for real, so that you can actually train for a long period in this safe fashion.
Yeah, it sounds like the first step is like we're assessing the physical body, and then we're going to determine what the next steps will follow that are to allow you to move in the direction of where you want to go. So now, is there a consideration around programming variables, like how much stress they can tolerate? How do you know in the beginning if this person should go into once a week, 3 times a week, 5 sets per workout, 20 sets per workout? Like, where does that assessment come in? Or is it more just like throw something at them and see how they tolerate it?
Pauric, do you want to attack this?
So generally, well, depending on what their skill level or training level is before they ever come to us will help. So their training history will help dictate that to a certain extent, because if they have been exposed to, say, 4 times a week training for the last 2 or 3 years, we know that they can at least handle that level of stressor. If they're a brand new novice, them being a novice is somewhat going to dictate the training split we use. So we're maybe going to lean heavier into a full body split for a novice, so they're getting more rehearsal of the same movement patterns, so a quicker learning, like motor learning curve. So that there's very much dictated by their training history. And then generally, even no matter where they were, we're going to start slightly on the lower end of the volume scale of things. So we have room to progress, because we know this is still going to be somewhat of a unique stressor the way we train for them. They haven't been exposed to this style of training before. So no matter what, they're going to get trained stimulus from it. And it's always easy to add volume to a program. It's sometimes harder to pull volume back and still have the long-term process that you're trying to gear up.
Yeah, because we're really big on the minimum effective dose.
Yeah.
So in our system, we have 3 different models of volume. So we have a low volume, moderate, high volume. So when it's a client that we don't really have a lot of information, or they're starting the training process, we'll start with the low volume, because why go to moderate or high volume if the low volume can affect change, right? Mm-hmm. So we go low volume approach, but then the assessment is ongoing. So from mesocycle to mesocycle or phase to phase, we assess constantly. So we look at the readiness score or session rate of perceived exertion, and we're trying to establish, okay, well, are they overworked? Is that too much stress for them? Is it the training or is it the lifestyle? So that's where the communication becomes important. So we're like, okay, I've noticed that this last phase, your readiness score was low and your rate of perceived exertion of the sessions was really high. So is it because your sleep is bad, your stress at work, your nutrition is bad, or is it simply literally the training that you can't cope with? So we try, with communicating with the client, establish what the situation is, and then we try to address the weakness that is lifestyle or training, but in the meanwhile, we'll reduce the volume. So there's that constant assessment. Then once they feel better, then okay, now we can revisit with higher volume. And doing it this way, it allows us to have like more long-term progress. Like we try to make sure we don't skip steps, because we understand the importance of the process and the training. That's why with our membership, we tend to, when we have people training with us, we tend to have 1-year membership. So they understand that it's a process. Yeah. Like the first 12 weeks, usually, it's more a lot of like gathering of information.
Totally. Foundations. Yeah, we call it first 10 days is an assessment, then the first 90 days is a foundational phase. Sounds like we'll end the same thing. How much of a swing between low volume, middle volume, and high volume are you guys looking at? Is this a set amount? Like it's going to be 6 sets of workout, 12 sets of workout, and 20 sets of workout? Or is it variable based person to person?
It's variable person, because the problem with the standard sets, you know, like a lot of hypertrophy research, you know, they're talking about like the 10 to 20 sets per body part per week. But the problem with this, sometimes, at least in the world of strength and conditioning, is not all sets are always created equal.
Well, even in bodybuilding, they're not.
Yeah. So for me to be like, okay, like a blank statement of you need 15 sets of quad work per week, well, it depends.
Sure.
Because if we're doing like heavy back squats, the sets are going to be way more draining than if we're doing a leg extension, for example. So we don't really. No, but on a neural perspective. So
you just gave me a look. So like,
so we're like it's hard to look at it this way.
Yeah.
So we kind of, because the way we structure our sessions is we have the A series, which is typically the multi-joint compound movement, like the skill movement. Then we have the B series, which is our assistance movements that are going to help leverage the primary. And then we have the C series, which is the remedial work, which is mostly like single joint, where we're trying to do pre-ab to avoid rehab. So we're going to target weaknesses or specific muscle groups that are a weak link in the chain of the primary lift. But everything is guided by the primary exercise. So most of our volume and intensity variations happen in the primary lift. And then the B and C series, they just support, but our volumes are pretty standard there. Like we have such a small window with the B and C series that we don't really account for this in our bigger picture of periodization, because the output is always somewhat consistent. But the big variations really happen with that A series, where we could do as low as 2 or 3 sets sometimes, or as high as 12 or 15 sets sometimes, depending on the goal. So, and then our reps will vary anywhere from 1 to 12. So the variability in volume is huge. So that's what we monitor the most, that A series. And then, for example, if the person doesn't have the skill to do the back squat and they're doing like that heel elevated goblet squat with a 30-degree wedge, so it's a different stressor than the back squat. So we we assess it a little differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is the measure of progress almost always strength? So is the thing you're solving for in that A series always like, I need you to get stronger at this? Is there other things you obviously said program for hypertrophy as well?
Yeah. I mean, strength, obviously there's that readiness score and rate of perceived exertion, but strength really is our main guide, because to me, as a coach, I'm trying to pull away anything that's more subjective. So I want some clear metrics, clear data, and I find that strength is the easiest metric to assess, to monitor progress.
Yeah, it either is or it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that once you get to a certain level, we know that we can expect a 2% rate of progress in strength on a session-to-session basis. So if there's a plateau, because sometimes plateau can be circumstantial, so we don't freak out if there's a plateau for like 2 weeks. But if it keeps happening and there's a trend, okay, then we need to make sure that we're trying to figure out what the issue is and we address it. And usually volume and exercise selection and even training split up to a certain point will be like one of the first things we're going to change.
Yeah, let's dig into all those. But first question that came up as you were talking is programming the same for men and women?
To us, pretty much. Obviously, like if we have like clients that we don't have a lot of these clients, but if we have clients in the physique side of the equation, where they have very specific looks they're going for, obviously the training will look completely different because that's the goal of what they're looking for. Right. But typically, it doesn't change much. I'll be quite honest.
Yeah, because if men and women both have the same overall outcome, which is just to try and get stronger, like they're going to respond very, very similarly. It's differently once you're starting to look at a more physique-based thing that they need to work on specific body parts, then yes, it would have to change slightly.
My brain just went to the hormone stuff, right? Okay. The hormones are cycling. I'm like, do we need to train differently, pre-cycle, post-cycle, like menopause or menstruation cycle, not anabolic cycle? Like, are we doing it differently? Do we change? I'm just curious if you guys were thinking about that, but.
So that's interesting because there's more and more study coming out with like parameters for women with everything surrounding the periods. Yeah. But what we've noticed though is a high percentage of women, at least on the numbers perspective, are not really affected by it. But once we train a female and we notice that there's a drop off in the days around the period, then we'll address it. So we might use a different mesocycle loading structure where we have a unloading period exactly at that time frame where they're struggling a little bit more with recovery. But to us, that's pretty much the extent of how we will differentiate the programming.
You said briefly the split for the week. And I'm curious, is there a way you think about how to separate body parts or how to separate lifts? Is it there's one or two you always stick with, or is it, like how do you think, not just what, I'm not asking if your favorite split, but I'm like, what's the thought process that goes into how you select a split throughout the week?
Yeah, so I mean, we have our go-to that I'd say with Pauric, like 80-85% of our clients. We like to have a upper 1, lower 1, Wednesday is off, upper 2, lower 2, and then the weekend off. So 4 times a week where we have 2 upper sessions, 2 lower sessions, and the exercise structure will change every time. So we have a wider range of motor units being recruited within the week. So this is our standard. And then depending on the goal, depending on the phase, depending on the recovery, then we might adjust this. Sometimes it might drop to 3 times a week. We have phases that might be bumped up to 5 times a week. When it's bumped up to 5 times a week, then we'll use more of a split routine, kind of like reminiscent of old school bodybuilding, or some of Charles's split where you had, like chest and back on one day, a lower body dominant day, and then a arms and shoulder day. So we have many different options that we'll use to address, but we use this mostly to address their ability to recover from training. So if we notice that upper 1, lower 1, upper 2, lower 2 becomes too draining, and their readiness starts dropping, then we're like, okay, let's split this up a little bit. Let's have a chest and back day, which will be the big prime movers. And then we have another upper body day, but it's more arms and shoulders. So it might be more single joint dominant. So at least on a recovery perspective, it's not as draining, but they still get the stimulus of going in the weight room. And then we might split the lower body more in like quad dominant day, posterior chain dominant day, again, to kind of like increase the recovery time between stressors instead of adding a stressor every 48 to 72 hours. When we have upper one, upper two, lower two. But the reality is most novice to intermediate, their strength level and their skill set is somewhat low. So they need the rehearsal and the frequency of at least those two exposures to really get better.
So someone who's more advanced would be training less often, potentially.
Potentially. Or what we do is now we'll use periodization model, like for example, daily undulating periodization models, where one day might be heavy, the other day is light. So now we have the rehearsal and the frequency, but we have different stressors.
Sure.
So we're basing everything on the premise that the more advanced you are, the more variation we integrate to the programming and periodization, and the more novice you are, the less variability we have to build intermuscular coordination.
Yeah. So let's assume we have an advanced athlete. What variables are we able to progress? So obviously when we're training something that's strength, like we're trying to get strong, like we're specifically trying to train your ability to move more weight on the bar. That's a pretty specific adaptation. When you're going to a lighter day, when you're going to something that's different, what other opportunities or variables are you, or progression variables are you looking to move?
Pauric, you want to take this?
Well, to start off with, we base our program around 8 primary lifts. So just to cover a wide spectrum of lifts. So we go for the upper body, overhead press, incline press, bench press, dip, chin up, then lower body with a back squat, with a front squat, and with a deadlift. So this year we're going to cover a wide range of motor units, different degree of pressing angles, so you'll be able to express force through a very wide degree of movement patterns. So since we are not powerlifters, we never had any ambition of being powerlifters. There's no need to specialize specifically in 3 lifts. So we're trying to target a more well-rounded full body approach. So those are the primary exercises we're going to look at. And then within that, so say it's a more advanced athlete, we could instead of run the 7-day microcycle that like Steph was talking about there, upper one, lower one, upper two, lower two, we could run a 14-day microcycle and then just touch those over the course of 14 days. And then within that, you can then manipulate the volume load that you're getting exposed to, or the combination of set reps and intensity. You can manipulate purely the volume, you can manipulate purely the intensity, and then within all those variables, depending on what the client has the bigger stress response or is the biggest effect on their recovery, you can really target what they need to bring up or bring down to allow them to keep making progress. Like volume load's a huge one. So can
you explain that to us?
So volume load is your sets times your reps. So the total amount of reps you're doing for that exercise within the session times the load you use. So a really easy example would be doing 3 sets of 10 with 100 kilos. So you're doing 30 total reps, 100 kilos, you're going to be doing 3,000 kilos of volume load. Mm-hmm. So the manipulation of that number is really has a massive impact on the recoverability from those sessions. So if you're combining sessions with really high volume loads with lower volume load sessions, it's just going to allow the body to recover over the course of time. So it's going to allow for the fitness fatigue paradigm to somewhat increase your preparedness. So like the whole premise of training is fatigue, mass fitness, but fatigue dissipates fast in fitness. So if we're manipulating volume load, it's just going to allow that fatigue to dissipate, preparedness to increase, so we can display a greater level of fitness.
Yeah.
So it's to me, that is the biggest manipulation that we can make for advanced athletes. And then we can go even further, like if people are still struggling with exercise selection, to manipulate volume load even further by purposely selecting exercises that have less loadability. So the difference of jumping on a leg extension or a leg press to work the knee extensors versus a step-up variation, it's going to have a massive impact on how much recovery needs you're going to have, but you're still training the same musculature.
Because why?
Because why? Because you're the stability aspect, the coordination aspect, you're not able to impose nearly as much stress with that step-up variation. Still a very important skill to train. It still has massive benefits on intermuscular coordination, so you can have a higher peak long-term. But on a purely muscular hypertrophy component, it's not going to nearly drive the fatigue levels as high, so it's not going to demand as much recovery.
And you have all this external stability, you can generate more force, therefore more damage, more fatigue.
Yeah, which is great, but it's got a time and its place. If someone's struggling with fatigue, that's a really good variable that we can manipulate to pull that back, still get the training units in, still get the training volume in, but allow for more recovery.
And with exercise selection, we like to manipulate within the microcycle. So the training week, we like to manipulate, if fatigue starts kicking in, the points of overload and the resistance curve of the movement. Because
let's talk about that, because that's how we're getting into my world.
but I'm telling you right now, we're nowhere near your world with that stuff. Us, it's really more we use this as a tool to monitor or balance the training load within the week. But it's not necessary. We're not necessarily doing this as for in the quest to build more specific hypertrophy, for example.
So I just call it positional overload. Like we're every muscle, and you guys can tell me if you think this is incorrect, but every muscle has a position of peak torque production, which time we're probably going to exert the greatest amount of force there. But just because I'm spending the most time, that doesn't mean there's other parts of the range don't have value. So like I want to overload every aspect of the range. And whether it's I think strength and hypertrophy are obviously very closely related, just sort of.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So we apply this for everyone, because if I see a position of weakness, no matter where it is in the range, I believe you need to address it, because it's always going to be the weak link in the chain. So that's the way we program exclusively. If I can see a weakness in some movement you do, I have to go after that, because that's the way I body build. It's like if I see a deficiency or a weakness, I have to make that a strength. And it sounds like you guys are approaching it the same way.
Yeah, so like, for example, so let's take the deadlift, the conventional deadlift. So the conventional deadlift, when it comes to the strength curve of the posterior chain, it overloads mostly the mid-range. So then if we see that the volume of deadlifting is such that it's creating fatigue, but we need more frequency of hip extension work within the week to really drive that musculature, well, then we're going to make sure that maybe on the other day, we're overloading the bottom range or the top range of the posterior chain. So not only is it balancing out the strength development through the entire resistance curve, but it's balancing out the output and the recoverability within the week, instead of doubling up again on another deadlift that still overloads the midpoint. And then let's say that you wanted 3 exposures, then maybe on deadlift day, which is more mid-range, and on the other day where we're going to target bottom range, we could finish the deadlift session in the end in that C series with another hip extension, but now that's more top range, and that's shorter in range of motion, like the hip thrust, for example. It's shorter range of motion, so less overall fatigue because of it. It overloads the top range of the strength curve. So now when we look at the entire week, when it comes to the resistance curve of the posterior chain, well, we stimulated the bottom, the mid, the top, but at different levels to help manage the recovery process within the week, and still being able to see positive changes in the strength of the main lift, which is the deadlift.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people in the bodybuilding world, and I'm sure you're hearing this at some level, that are really of the mind that the only position that needs to be trained is the lengthened position, because there's like, this lengthened range hypertrophy thing, and it's just inexperience, right? I don't think they're stupid, I just think they're inexperienced, and I'm like, you're right, they need to be trained lengthened range, but what they don't acknowledge is the mid-range and the shortened range have value, even though it may not be the same weight in value, the same application, there's still value in all aspects of those range, whether it just be for balance, structural balance around the joint. Like if we start to do too many things in one position, like you're saying, the body's going to develop imbalances. You're going to develop some type of strength deficiency.
Absolutely. And then, yes, the length position, it might be great for hypertrophy or other situations, but let's say I'm training a grappler. Well, I cannot just train the lengthened position of the hamstring.
Totally.
Because at one point, if he's in an arm lock and he needs to squeeze his leg and keep keep full flexion.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I need to be strong in the top range.
Right.
So in the shortened position.
Yep.
So that needs to be trained. So because my bias is more sports performance, even when I'm training Gen Pop, I still look at programming with that lens.
Every joint angle. Yeah, I think everyone should look at it through that lens. I can't see an application unless you're trying to, I think it's when you're getting into sports specificity, like, yeah, I have a powerlifting meet in this amount of time, and I just need to be really good in this position for this lift, go for it. But if you're trying to be a well-functioning athlete or a well-functioning human, then all positions are valuable.
So in 2007, I was assessing a guard, a O-line in the NFL. And he came to me because his shoulders were destroyed, okay? And the thing, after talking to him, in college, he was doing West Side type of training. In the pros, he was doing West Side type of training. So guess what they did for pressing all the time? Bench press. So when we assessed bench press, he had a really good bench press. He had a 435-pound bench press with a 4-second down explosive concentric. But his overhead press, so 435 on bench, his overhead press, he could only do 95. Why? He'd never done it.
Sure.
So the problem now, he had this crazy strength discrepancies within his pressing angles. And that strength discrepancy created a lot of issues. So as the guard, every time the D tackle came at him and you went into pass protect, well, guess what arm position he's in? He's in the overhead position, but he had no strength and no stability because he had never trained that angle. So to us, when we're dealing with athletes, that's why he was saying that we have those 4 angles as part of our primary, because strength is so angle specific. And then when we're training Gen Pop, we understand that they're not playing a sport, they're not competing in powerlifting, they're weekend warriors. They want to be strong across multiple sports or across all angles, so we need to address this.
And what's really important is, even when we're talking about all these exercises or all these different parts of the resistance curve or strength curve, you don't need to train everything each week, as long as we're training it in the long term. So we try to make sure over the course of 12 weeks that all of these different things, all these different facets have been trained and somewhat in balance as well. So it's not that 90% of your work was done in the lengthened position with 5% in mid and top range. So we were trying to balance it out over time, or maybe slightly bias a little bit more volume towards a specific weakness over time.
That's the thing I notice as I age has changed is, one, I try to get all things in all workouts because I'm like, my ability, in the past, I could not train for a month and I'd come back and nothing would have changed. I'm like, I'm still good. Strength's still there. Mobility's still there. I feel great. Now that I'm in my 40s, I don't train for 3 days and I feel like I regressed about 6 years. I was like, man, I got to keep it all up. So that's a good question to go like, well, how often do you need to keep up a skill in your experience or to maintain it? Like, how often do I need to do a specific lift or specific position or a specific maybe weight to be able to sustain it? I know it's a very open-ended question. I'm curious how you think about it above all.
And personally, I feel that certain lifts require more rehearsal than other lifts.
Sure.
So for example, I think once you have a good base, something like bench press or incline press, you can get away with moving away from it for a while. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But something like a back squat, which has a lot of mobility component to it, if you stay away from it for too long, you're losing that skill really, really quick. Yeah. So to us, the back squat is the one that we rehearse the most. There's always exception, but for the most part, there's not a week that we don't back squat. Unless you have restriction, but that we don't do a squat pattern, okay? Because you lose that skill really quick. The chin up is another one. You need frequency to build it, but you stay away from it for too long. You used to be able to pop out 12. Then you're like, I can only do 4.
Right.
But I've been doing pull downs for but it's not the same thing. The chin up, you have to stabilize your body through space and on and on. So it's a different beast,
Yeah.
Yeah, and all exercises have different levels of complexity. Like the Schmidt-Bleicher made the 7 levels of exercise complexity, with Olympic lifts being the top. So obviously the higher that level of complexity, the more rehearsal and more often it's going to need training to maintain that skill. So the bigger compound movements are always going to degrade a little bit quicker than, say, an isolation movement, especially on a machine where you can just lock in and just work. So the higher the complexity will need that frequency in rehearsal.
And then because even if we take the novice, like the pure novice, I remember early in my career, if let's say I used a body part split, right? And the client was training 3 times a week. We had chest and back, lower body, arms and shoulders one day. And then on lower body, I'm teaching the split squat to somebody that's new to training. Well, you're teaching the split squat, they're struggling. They finally get it by the last set of the session. But then the next session is 7 days later. Right. So now the client lost the whole thing. Totally. So you need to rebuild it. So very quickly I realized, whoa, wait a sec. So the novice needs more rehearsal of that same movement. But what's hard with the Gen Pop trainer is now you have to navigate that fine line because the clients get bored. So now, but it's boring. I'm doing the same thing all the time. Yeah, but you're so bad at it. You need to do the same thing all the time. Yeah. So you need to explain. You need to have the buy-in. And what I've always thought was funny, that's what I always tell these clients, is like, before you came to me, you said that you were training for a marathon. And you said that you were running 6 days a week. You didn't complain that it was repetitive and always the same thing. Right. So why is it that me asking you to do split squat 2 or 3 times a week is too much and it's boring for 3 sets? So
what I always find funny about this is they're not doing the same thing every day. Because if they were, we wouldn't have to do all this rehearsal. They haven't done 2 reps that look the same, never mind 2 sets. Yeah. So people have to let go of being entertainers and embrace being trainers and just give the clients what they need more so than what they want.
It's a hard thing for a lot of new coaches to navigate. I think that's sort of what you were getting at is like knowing what to do. So like you said, giving them what they need. How do I know what they need? And so like that's sort of what I wanted to start with today is like, what's the assessment process? Like, because an average coach listening to this podcast, like I have a client in front of me. I see they need something. Maybe I assess some strengths and weaknesses, but I'm like, how do I actually know what they need? And then how do I know what they need second? And how do I know what they need third? And so that's really what I'd love to get into. So you're looking at Pauric and you're like, hey man, how do we know what he needs first, second, and third?
Okay. I'm going to try to do my best to answer this as precisely as possible. So to us, you're a new client. And we know that Gen Pop, their number one goal, 99% of the time is fat loss, right? But they come to us for fat loss in the gym. So I'm not going to stand next to a client for 60 minutes watching them do treadmill, right? Right. So if you're coming to me for personal training, we're doing strength work. But you're novice, you've never lifted. So we're not really going to be able to affect fat loss with strength training right off the get-go. You have zero intermuscular coordination or ability to recruit motor units. Yeah. So we need...
So no output, basically.
Yeah. So we need to address the fat loss through nutrition, and we know how hard this can be. But it is what it is. So at first, you need to learn to lift. Once you learn to lift, if your goal then is still fat loss because the nutrition didn't do its work, then we can start using more metabolic type training modalities to affect fat loss because now you actually can recruit motor units and have enough output to affect change. But even if you come to me and your goal is fat loss, but you've never lifted, I'm sorry, we're going to lift normally because you need to build intermuscular coordination within multi-joint patterns so you can build the nervous system to be able to lift. Hartman and Tuneman, 2 German exercise scientists, they established years ago, we're talking about early 80s, that a novice can, at best, recruit 60% of their entire motor unit pool. Whereas, for example, a thrower at the Olympic level can recruit up to 90% of their motor units. So the goal as a personal trainer in the weight room is to teach the trainee to get closer to that 90%. So that now when you're lifting, there is more output. You can lift more weight. There's also more demands on the recovery structure. There's more response on the hormonal output from the session and on and on. But if right away you're like, oh, fat loss, you don't know how to train, but we're just going to do metabolic work, to me, you're not really helping the client. So it starts with the movement assessment that we talked about earlier, making sure you have the mobility to do the movement safely. Once you can do the movement, learn the skill, build that intermuscular coordination, which is actually done at 60 to 80% of 1RM, which fits exactly the early stages of training. And then once that's kicked in, then we can move on to more specific hypertrophy, strength, or power goals. But it needs to be that step by step. So for us, the initial process is almost always the same thing. The only difference will be the speed at which you move on to the next thing.
Right.
Because I've trained people, the day that they really train high-level professional athletes and they see the efficiency of their nervous system, they'll understand what I'm talking about. I was training this wide receiver, NFL wide receiver one time, and it's session number 1. We're doing the Peterson step up. I don't know if you've ever done it, but this exercise sucks because it requires so much balance. You need to go on top of your toes. It's kind of hard on a technical perspective to do. Most people, it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to learn. This guy, session 1, we were doing Peterson twice a week. Session 1, he was all over the place. He couldn't even stand up. Session 6, 3 weeks later, he was using 90-pound dumbbells for 10 reps. But that's how their nervous system catches and learn. So him, I could progress him really fast. Whereas sometimes Gen Pop, we can be doing Peterson step up for weeks and weeks.
3 years and still not getting it.
Yeah. So it's very dependent.
So you said phase 2, you progress people, provided it's Gen Pop, from what we'll say is some version of foundational phase into a muscle building phase. So what does that start to look like?
It's the same thing, but it's the volume prescription and the intensity prescription that will change. But it's not like necessarily our exercise selection will vary that much in that sense. We still roll through our primary lift. We still try to drive these up because for us, it's the only way to really know if there's progress.
So what's the primary driver of muscle building? Is it strength? Is it volume? Is it how do you know that the client in front of you is going to drive muscle building?
I mean, you could use DEXA and just look at the raw amount of skeletal muscle mass.
What signal are you trying to elicit in their body? What are you doing? How do you know?
So, okay, I'm not one to believe that there's only mechanical tension involved into the mix. I think you need a mixture of different stimulus to optimize hypertrophy.
Yep.
Ultimately, at one point, it has to move to the point where mechanical tension becomes the main stressor.
Okay.
But I'm also a firm believer that creating work capacity in the early days of training can leverage your ability to build muscle in the future. So we might have, in the early stages of training, phases where we could put a client through a hypertrophy specialization where they're doing trisets or giant sets or something like that for a phase, which we call the accumulation phase, where the main driver is volume. And then at that point, we're building work capacity, we're improving nutrient storage mechanism, we're improving mitochondrial function, the whole metabolic pathway. But then the next phase will be an intensification phase, where now the load becomes a main driver and mechanical tension, mechanical stress becomes the main trigger of what we're trying to do.
I'm with you.
And in my opinion, if you have a balancing act between the two stressors over time, that's how you'll optimize your hypertrophy. But there'll be a point in time, and to us, we have this test that we call the relative strength ratio, which is a measure of strength on the squat and bench as a relation to your body weight, just so we have a general understanding of the relative strength level of the trainee. And we know that at one point, once you're strong enough, then it's easier to maintain that hypertrophy and start driving more strength by now focusing mostly on the neural aspect of training.
Yep.
But you need to do the work first at building that work capacity, because if you have a high level of work capacity and a solid base of hypertrophy, now the advantage is you can do a lot more volume at high intensity and drive a faster and greater strength response so that your peak is much higher.
So that was the goal that I was looking for right there, right? So everyone's talking about mechanical tension being the driver, but they're not talking about what needs to precede mechanical tension to allow you to actually generate mechanical tension. So you nailed it. Love it, man.
Yes.
So it's like, I need intramuscular glycogen, I need muscular endurance, I need coordination. There's a whole bunch of factors that have to happen before I can generate maximum tension. And then it needs to be in a cyclical manner, because obviously once you max out tension, you got to go back and like reestablish those foundational sort of requirements, those foundational characteristics before you can then drive mechanical tension again.
And on top of this, if we backtrack even more, you first need to build that intermuscular coordination in order to be able to do this with that mechanical tension. And then once you have the intermuscular coordination, now you need to build the intramuscular coordination. But if you don't build adequate intermuscular...
Can you differentiate for me?
Yeah, so intermuscular coordination, simply it's the ability of the nervous system to coordinate different muscle structures together in the performance of a motor pattern.
Yeah.
Whereas intramuscular coordination is the ability of the brain to recruit more motor units within a given muscle structure.
Yep, makes sense.
So intramuscular coordination is the holy grail, but intramuscular coordination can only really truly be trained at really high intensities. But if you didn't precede this with proper intermuscular coordination work at lower intensities, you're never going to be able to truly leverage that mechanical tension type of work. So if you're going right into, okay, I believe in that model, so I want to get as jacked as possible. I've never trained ever before, but let's go. We're going to do sets of 5 or 6 right off the bat. It's just you're limiting your potential.
So in like third grade language, it's like first move well, then get strong.
Yes.
Yeah,
and like you said earlier, we firmly believe that hypertrophy and strength go together.
Of course.
That's what people always tell us, but what's the difference between hypertrophy and strength? Well, it's the same thing. It's just hypertrophy, the average intensity might be a little lower.
Yeah, so I have a slight differentiating factor that I throw out is I almost view them as opposite ends of the continuum that meet in the middle. And so hypertrophy is easiest to categorize as isolation, whereas strength is easiest to categorize as function. And so function is multiple muscles creating a movement pattern that is ultimately as efficient as possible. So I'm using as many different muscles based on their the size principle, their ability to like the size and leverage of those muscles is going to generate the greatest amount of torque production, force production. Hypertrophy is meant to position your body into the ideal position to isolate a smaller number of muscles to do the greatest amount of work. So it's like if I'm doing a bench press for strength, I'm trying to get everybody to do as much work as possible with no regard for, I need my pecs to work more in this exercise. Whereas hypertrophy can be slightly different changes to isolate the pecs to do a greater percentage of the overall load. That's really the only differentiating factor that I like to double click on, because it does matter for some people. So for example, I might be better at bench pressing for strength with one position and might be better at bench pressing for hypertrophy with a different position, just based on leverages. That's the only differentiating factor that I separate.
But that works well because you have the skills.
Right, totally. Yeah, you need
because the reason why I'm saying that we don't have a difference between hypertrophy and strength, aside from the intensity, what I meant is if you're learning to bench press, well, we might have a phase where the average intensity of the phase, let's say it's 75%. So the overall response will be one of slightly more hypertrophy because it's slightly more metabolic in nature.
Yep.
But you're learning to lift. So we need to train that hypertrophy with the bench press because we're trying to leverage the intermuscular coordination of a lower intensity bench press to get better at a higher intensity bench press.
Right.
So if you're novice, we can't use, let's say, a pec deck machine to generate hypertrophy in the pec and then think that automatically that novice trainee that did a month of pec deck will now be able to bench press at higher level because they didn't develop those intermuscular coordination skill on the bench press.
Right.
But once you reach a certain level and your nervous system is super efficient at recruiting motor units and you're really, really skilled at these big strength lift, then again, you have way more variety in programming and then you can go and access and play around with different modalities to further enhance hypertrophy. And then you get back to bench, but you already have that skill.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind as you say that, if I've got a 13-year-old son who actually plays with Mark's son, Larry's son, And they're doing like, oh, we want to train. We want to come to the gym. We want to do some coordinates. I was like, you need like 3 things, man, maybe 5, you know? And like, you need to get really good at these. Like, you need to probably be really good at squatting, and you probably need to be really good at deadlifting, maybe lunging, maybe pull-ups, maybe bench presses, maybe overhead presses, you know, like that's it. And like, you're developing this intermuscular coordination. So we actually learn how to do the movement pattern well first. They could literally spend the next 8 years of their lives until they're 21 years old doing that, just that. And once they've done that, they're from 21 on, they're going to appreciate it so much rather than trying to do bicep curls and tricep extensions and overhead this and overhead. I'm like, hold on, just do these. So is that sort of aligning with your
100%? And during that time, it's not like your son won't build muscle.
Right.
It's just, it won't be targeted.
Right.
Like it's going to be in response to the motor pattern that he's been training. And then once they reach a certain level, then you can pinpoint and target.
Yeah, it's almost why parents advocate for like diverse sports in their children, right? It's like you got to be a gymnast and you got to play hockey and you got to play football and you got to play all the things. So you're developing all the diverse movement patterns at the level of the brain and nervous system.
Yeah, and like in early athlete development, that is the most beneficial avenue they can take, is to play as many different sports, have as many different situations thrown at them as possible, so they learn how to react and to overcome different obstacles. But because that is going to have the highest athletic potential, if you want to put it that way, much more so than going into the gym and getting stronger on whatever exercise. Until you hit about 16, 17, then you have to definitely start to bring the special. It doesn't have to be specialized. You can still play multiple sports, but you definitely can't have this wider variety of sports. And then it's way more important to dedicate more time to resistance training and developing more basic biomotor abilities.
Because, like, for example, like for youth, right, the squat is such an important motor pattern because, well, first of all, the Swedes and the Swiss, they did studies in the early 90s where they established and they showed that lack of ankle mobility was the number one predictor of any type of lower body injury.
Specifically dorsiflexion or?
Mostly dorsiflexion. Yeah. So the advantage of focusing on the squat in the early stages of training is not only are you building that intermuscular coordination in a multi-joint compound lift, but if you're teaching it properly, well, you're improving mobility at the ankle joint.
Yeah.
You're improving resiliency at the knee joint if you're teaching that full squat. You're improving lower back strength. You're maintaining or creating more external rotation range of motion, which are all components that are extremely important for an athlete as they get older.
Sure.
And then as you get stronger with the skills of a proper squat, now you're building that true resiliency that you need in these ranges. For example, I trained Steven Jackson, who's running back for the St. Louis Rams. And I trained him starting his rookie year, and I trained him until he retired. And at 21, he was a first-round pick. He came in. Ankle mobility was really bad, and he couldn't split squat. He had no range of motion. So if you're a running back in the NFL and you have a D tackle jumping on your back as you're running, making a step, and then cutting, well, you need to have a lot of resiliency in that knee joint in that bottom range if you don't want that knee to explode, right? Yeah. So if I can get you to the point where now you can squat properly with a lot of weight, now I know that the chances of you having a knee that explode under that D tackle is reduced. We can't say if American football is too drastic. We can't eliminate injury, but at least we're lowering the incidence because now that joint has been through the rigors of overload in that bottom range. So that's why to us, these movements are so key in the early development of a strength training.
So when say I walk into a gym and I say, hey, I want to get strong. And, we decided we're going to work on bench press, we're going to work on pull-ups, and we're going to work on squats. I'd like to sort of understand your thought process around how you choose your B's and your C's. So if we know those are my A's, I'd love to understand what are my B's and my C's. Obviously individual, but what's the thought process?
I mean, the upper body is really simple in the sense that that happened to me in 2009. Like I've always been obsessed with writing programs for clients and then going back and analyzing the programs and finding trends. Like then you're like, okay, well, these guys are performing really well. These guys not as much. What is it in the program that? And then at one point in 2009, I realized a common trend, and I realized that every time that I would write a training week, so let's say the compound primary movement is a overhead press, I would need the B1, the B series, that's another press, to be a flat press. If I had an incline press, I needed the B to be a decline press. And I call it the 90-degree principle. Yeah. So what happens is within the session, you're training two angles that are 90 degrees apart. What I realized, and then the other session, you flip. So if you have overhead and flat on upper one, you have flat and overhead on upper two, and our mesocycles are 3 weeks. So what happens is for 3 weeks, we saturate two angles. Then the next 3 weeks, we switch to the other two angles. We saturate them for 3 weeks. Then we get back the first angle. So now we have that super compensation of strength because these specific motor units had time to recover. So this is like the premise of our B series selection with the pressing movement. And then when it comes to pulling movement, the A2 tends to be a chin-up variation, which is more compound. It's multi-joint, but really compound because of the loadability of it. But it's more of a scap depressor and still an internal rotator of the humerus. So now we make sure that the other B exercise, which is a pulling, becomes a rowing variation, which is more scap retraction. So again, we're making sure that we're working on two ends of the spectrum with our upper back. So we're balancing output. And then eventually, what happens, you start gathering data. And this, I mean, it started with the Russians, but I learned this from Charles Poliquin. And now you start looking at strength ratios. So now, I mean, with all the data that we've gathered over the years, now we have strength ratios for a gazillion lift. So we know that, for example, like your elbow out row should be a certain percentage of your bench press. And then your row with the elbow to the side should be another percentage. So if your row with the elbow... Is it
a specific percentage or a range?
Well, we have a specific percentage, but we're not, we're not like fixed on it as long, because there's also like body dimensions that comes into play. So we're not like super dogmatic about it, but we hate to put exercise for no purpose. Like we like to make sure there's always a reason why we choose an exercise. So if, for example, your elbow in row is really, really strong in a strength ratio perspective, but your elbow out is really, really weak. Well, why would I keep programming the elbow in?
Of course.
So let's program more elbow out to balance things out. So we fine-tune exercise selection using the strength ratio as a guide instead of blindly up. We'll do a closed grip row here for no reason. Right? So that's what we do. We do the same thing with lower body. We have a foundation. We start with split squats in the B series at first to make sure we're building that ankle
split squats,
mobility.
Like rear leg elevated, front leg elevated. What do you prefer?
Well, I mean, we typically start with the front foot elevated because people are usually so tight in the hip flexors and rectus femoris and lat ankle dorsiflexion. If the person has no mobility issue, we bypass it and we start feet flat on the floor and we get to the rear foot elevated only once the person's built enough range of motion, because we really like our split squat to be down and forward and not up and down, so that there's true ankle dorsiflexion and true flexion at the knee, and you keep the torso upright so that the hip flexors and rec fem of the trailing leg is like stretched in a dynamic fashion. So once we reach that level, then we progress the complexity. But this happened to Pauric. At one point, the split squat was so freaking strong. So I'm like, why are we... The technique was great. The strength was super strong. Why are we split squatting? Now we ditched the split squat, and now Pauric does lunge instead, which is the same motor pattern, but it's dynamic in nature. So it's a little bit more intense. And eventually his lunge was really strong. Okay, that's too easy. Let's do a triple jumper step up, which is way more complex, which is much harder to do. So that becomes his next challenge. So that's how we manipulate exercise selection.
Very cool. Love that. How was that experience for you?
It's good because especially obviously the more complexity that's built into the programming, it immediately reduces your load straight away. So your recoverability gets a bit better. You feel like you get somewhat of a boost in your results again just from the drop in load. So that there is very profound, and you feel it like week one, you'll feel that. Week one, you're still sore. But yeah, you'll feel the massive difference in your recoverability. And then once you get to the point that everything's somewhat within their ratios, then you play about with variations that target very specific weak points or issues. So say like I got to the point where all three of those ratios are well within check. So technically I don't have to, it's not that you ever have to choose one of these exercise variations, but I will then move away from these variations and choose a very specific lift that's going to address a key weakness in whatever other lower body exercise I have. So say I'm targeting to bring up a deadlift or bring up a squat, I can say, all right, where's my sticking point within that exercise, or where's my lag and muscle group within that exercise? And then just specifically target either muscle group, range of motion, part of the resistance curve, depending on what I'm trying to achieve with those exercises. So that's the level of individualization you can get to when you've gathered a ton of training history with clients. The problem is once you're starting with someone, you don't have that level of individuality because you don't have that level of training history, because so few people track and log meticulously that they can provide you that level of history.
What happens when someone has an imbalance left to right on their body? Like, do you guys have, it's just like, hey, I don't want to deal with this. Go see a therapist. Do you guys choose exercise selection to try to correct people? Like, obviously, depending how the wide range of injuries that are available. But what if there's no injury possible or no injury present? You're just like, hey, there's a pretty big disparity here, whether it be the hip or the ankle or the knee. Any specific thought process?
Yeah, so this usually is when we're going to focus on more unilateral work, and we'll typically start with the weakest or the tightest limb, and then we'll match that with the strongest side. Yeah. If the discrepancy is significant, then we might add more volume to the weaker side. And if the discrepancy is really crazy, then it might just be we're just going to train that one side. But that's kind of rare. If that happens, usually you kind of need to refer out because there might be some underlying issue that I'm not aware of. We stay our lane. We try to stick to what we can do in the weight room in these situations, and we'll
give you something else. Yeah. Do you have any? So you guys sound like you're really accelerating a couple things. You're accelerating the learning curve of exercises. You're like, hey, you need to get these intermuscular coordination really fast. You're also maximizing strength gains. And I'm curious, from a supplement and nutrition perspective, do you guys have any like super supplement stacks that are optimizing brain health, or do you stick with the Pauric protocols when it comes to the Bacopa and all these crazy things for enhancing skill acquisition on strength exercises?
A lot of our input with nutrition and supplementation in the recent years has been highly influenced by James Laval.
Yeah.
So it's
a good person to be influenced by. Is he near you guys? Is he near Kilo?
I'm sorry?
Is he near the gym?
No, he's based off of Austin. He used to be based in Cali.
Yeah.
When we were in Cali, and basically at the same time we moved to Florida, he moved to Austin and he opened his clinic there. But I've been working with him since 2013, so know him pretty well, and he's influenced a lot of what we do with nutrition and supplementation. But because the thing is, because we cater to coaches, like literally 99% of the people that we train are personal trainers and strength coaches. We give general guidelines with nutrition and supplementation, but it's not something that we push that much. So we're very basic with a foundational supplement base.
Yep.
Pretty well balanced nutrition where we're not dogmatic. We're not like carnivore people or this or that. We believe in protein. We believe in a ton of vegetables. We believe in healthy fats and then carbs when needed at specific times. And the more volume we have with the training, the more carbs we'll drive. But we tend to drive carbohydrates more with the peri-workout nutrition. So we like to, for simplicity's sake, for the Gen Pop client, we like to standardize the food that they eat so it's easier on a meal prep perspective, and we'll manipulate the peri-workout nutrition a lot, which this, in a way, will create some type of calorie cycling.
That's exactly how I was when I was competing. That's what some days I can have 300 grams of carbs around the workout.
Yeah.
That's all that changed. Everything else was the same. So
Yeah.
we're landing in the same place.
To me, it's easier. You get better adherence.
Yeah.
And once you get the adherence, and now they're starting to get the feel of it, and they're liking it. But we're very basic. We like EAA's intro workout with electrolytes. I love whey protein concentrate post-workout with, we use the company ATP Lab.
Yep.
Great relationship with the owner, Robert. So we use Pentacarb, which is a blend of 5 different carbohydrates post-workout. And then, like, depending on the goals of the client and obviously their income, and like we might, push the envelope a little bit, like James Laval, like they have a brand, a supplement company called Metabolic Elite, where they have very cool targeted liposomal like compounds. So if someone needs a little bit more brain health, we might refer, but we keep it very simple. Because the thing is, like I know you're familiar with Charles Poliquin. Like back in 2008 or 2009, man, sometimes you'd be popping like 90 pills a day. At one point, you get pill fatigue.
Yeah, totally. Those BCAAs, you had to take 700 during the workout.
Yeah. So we try to target the big bang for your buck, and promote like healthy, sound eating patterns.
What still drives you to continue to grow, get better, and teach what you teach? What's your primary driver?
I mean, honestly, we love what we've created. We spend so much time building the systems, trying the systems with clients, analyzing the information, tweaking, that we firmly believe in what we do to create results in our sphere, that what we're passionate about is trying to teach as many coaches as we can our system because we believe in it. And there's nothing that makes us happier than when we see the smile and the students. I know it sounds cheesy, but when you see the students like smiling and super happy when they leave the class and they apply the stuff right on Monday and they see results, that's great.
They're making more money. Their bodies get better. Their clients get better. It's this butterfly effect. That's the same reason why I started the certification. Because
to me, the thing is, I believe that being a personal trainer is a great profession.
Yep.
But it's hard. It's time consuming. And a great personal trainer is somebody who will spend the time with the client during that 60-minute period. That's like attentive to every detail, that cares about the client. But if you have 8, 10 clients a day, okay, and you want to do a good job training that client,
very hard.
You won't have time to program 20 hours a week and overthink about everything. So what we wanted to do is create a system that allows coaches to program quickly, systematically, in a repeatable fashion so that they can progress their clients over time, but without necessarily overthinking and overanalyzing and spending hours and hours per week on the programming part so they can focus on what's really more important, caring for the client.
Yeah.
Because if you have like 30 clients and you're training 50 hours a week, like we have a student in Washington, D.C., like he averages 53 hours of PT per week. Like he doesn't have time to spend 15 hours a week writing programs.
Right.
But, with our system, it's like bang, bang, you can write programs rather quickly because it's so systematic. And so anyways, that's what makes us happy, to be going honest.
How about yourself?
It's very similar because the fact as us as personal trainers, we could maybe affect, say, 30 clients at a time. But the fact that we're now actually branching out and affecting the trainers who each can affect 30 clients at a time. So it just sort of spawns out. So just the bigger impact that you can have and knowing that people are getting the train with better principles and getting better results because of it. So they're actually getting what they pay for. That's somewhat amazing.
It's some version of like we struggled and we know what it's like for me. I'm like, I know what it was like to struggle. And like, I'm like, oh, I can make this so much easier for you. Just do this, not that. And you're like, so it sounds like we've sort of landed in the same thing. What have we missed when it comes to programming, Stephane? What else that is super important that you want to touch on?
I mean, I think we did a good job with the program design. The periodization, I mean, it's simple and complicated at the same time. I think that like I was saying earlier in our discussion, that I saw flaws with the Olympic style periodization information because it's so targeted to sports performance, and especially on the Olympic level where they're competing once or twice a year, that I basically over the years deconstructed that information and created our own system, but more on Gen Pop. So for example, in sports training, a macro cycle is typically a training year or the period leading to the main event.
Right.
But if you're training Gen Pop, they're not competing. So I'm not going to build a 1 year macro cycle. It makes zero sense.
Right.
So our macro cycles are 12 weeks. So for 12 weeks, we treat it as if there's an event at the end of the 12 weeks, but the event is a goal. So it might be hypertrophy, absolute strength, relative strength. It might be power. It might be body composition. So whatever that goal is, so we have our starting point. Let's do our best to reach them as much as we can in 12 weeks. So now the training on a periodization perspective will focus on that goal for 12 weeks. After that, then we target a different goal for another 12 weeks. So it keeps the training interesting for the client. But at the same time, what's good about 12 weeks is it's long enough to be able to affect change on a cellular level and even on a strength perspective, but not so long that the client becomes complacent and bored with the training. Yeah, so that's where our periodization is kind of like cool in that sense. And I was saying earlier that we look at things on a long-term perspective. So even the manipulation of intensities, we basically map it out for 4 years. And then we kind of move through those blocks over time, and we let the model dictate the goal sometimes when the client is... Because a lot of Gen Pop at one point, they don't really know what they want.
Of course.
And they always want fat loss, but you cannot train for fat loss forever.
Right.
So eventually, we kind of, without them really knowing, figure out the goal, but in a way that's going to leverage everything else. So that over time, 3 years later, they look at themselves in the mirror and it's like, God, Jesus, like I changed.
Yep. So I talk about trajectory. So rather than like deadlines, I'm like, I'm going to optimize trajectory. So whatever we need to do now to increase the trajectory of your progress, that's what we're working towards. So whatever that program looks like. It sounds like we're saying the same thing with different language.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like it all, like it's similar to like Mike Stone, like sequential periodization. Like you build a very certain quality to leverage the next one. So hypertrophy is going to leverage strength. Strength's going to leverage power. Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's just doing it depending on what the client's goal is or what their long-term vision of themselves.
Right. I love that. That's probably the biggest point to hit home for the listener is like everyone comes in with a 12-week goal and everyone comes like, oh, I'm going to do it in the next couple months. And you're just like, man, what would it look like? And I would say this to everybody when they start. I'm like, what would it look like if 12 months from today, you're exactly where you want it to be? Would you be happy? I'm like, oh yeah, I'd be so happy. So how about we just take that 90-day goal and push it out to 12 months? So we give us a better opportunity to like not only teach you the new skills to maximize the trajectory, maximize the sustainability, and do it in a way that you'll never have to fight with that problem again. Like you've got it and you've got something sustainable and useful and valuable, not just like a one and done and like, oh shit, now I'm fat again. What do I do? It's like you've actually become a new person in the process because you've acquired the skills, the beliefs, and the habits to move yourself into this new way of living.
Yeah, because like say that you said, okay, yes, we can do that in this next 12 weeks. But I know with what I need to give you to get there in the next 12 weeks, you're not going to do that ever again.
Totally.
That is going that habit is going to end, and within 3 months after that, if you're lucky, you're back to
and everything else in your life is going to fall. Like something's going to fall, right?
Yeah. So like the real thing you need to ask your clients is, where do you want to be in a year, but do you want to build a habit for life?
Right.
Because there's no point doing it for 3 months.
Right.
And anybody that they always look up to in terms of, I'd love to look like this person or be as strong as this person, they're all people that just grind,
20 years,
bust their asses for years and years doing the same thing. So, well, you want to be like this, let's take the step that you need to be like this. Yeah. And also, I'm very clear with clients, they need to understand that if you're coming into a gym for strength training purposes, there's two things there's two real main things that you can do with strength training, and that's it. There's build muscle and build strength. So if you're coming to the gym to have long muscles or blah blah blah, whatever,
right,
or tone, but that's not what we're doing.
It's not a real thing. Yeah,
strength training leads to increased hypertrophy and strength. That's it. So, do you want that? Yes, let's do it.
Gents, it's an absolute pleasure. Finally got to sit down. I've been waiting for a long time, man. It's a pleasure. I'd love to coordinate for a workout sometime soon. Film that for the audience. I think they're gonna like that. I'll come down there. You guys come up here, do an exchange, and do it again. Go a couple levels deeper.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Gavin.